And now on Foam Fest Live 2, here just after 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a sunny day here in London, we go to Tom from Foam Fest Services, who is talking about community blasters, first with Viking foam arms and Atch attachments.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to my kitchen again. And as you can see, we've got Nicholas from Viking Foam Arms here, and Andrew from Atch. So, who wants to go first? I think Andrew's muted at the moment. So if we go to Nicholas first, we're going to talk about community blasters for the next 2 hours. Viking Foam Arms is a big supplier in Europe of various blasters, and Nicholas also is a printer and creator of lots of bits and pieces, and he has the license for a number of US-made blasters and some of the metric kits. So, Nicholas, if you'd just like to introduce yourself in terms of what you do with Viking Foam Arms, and then it's over to you.
Yeah, my name is Nicholas. I've been running Viking Foam Arms for 3/4 of a year now, and have had a lot of very positive feedback about taking a lot of these awesome designs and getting them into Europe and building blasters for people. As you can see on the wall behind me, I got a wide selection of blasters as well as some others laying around. I'm probably going to show off during this stream. So, and yeah, lots of purple because that's kind of my theme. What else do we do?
Did you start Viking? What was the kind of inspiration behind starting Viking Foam Arms for you?
I've been building blasters for quite some time, like mostly since I got my first 3D printer, and I've done a few commissions here and there, but when I have built basically all the stuff behind me, I wanted to build more stuff, so I started selling blasters, first under the Nerf Creek brand, but that was impossible to pronounce for anyone who's not a Dane, so I changed it up and went with Viking Foam Arms instead, and have just been building stuff. I've been supplying to all around the world by now.
And when were you first aware, what kind of was the first community blaster that really caught your eye? One that you just saw and you went, I want to make that, and I want to make that available to people?
The first printed blaster I got myself was a caliber, and I got back in 19, just before the first Foam Fest, and then I've went that's a new thing, that's high powered. We didn't have anything like that in the nerf scene here. We had been running around with I had some of the most high powered blasters, and they were hitting maybe 140. So I saw the caliber, and then our group was getting a lot of stuff from Jackie and Jesse over at Project FDL, and I got one of those kits, and as far as I know, that's the first 3D printed blaster in Denmark I had standing on the shelf up there. And then
FDL was your first 3D printed blaster that you had.
The Caliburn was the first blaster I got myself and printed, and then I've since gotten FDL, and I have actually built some FDLs as a licensed dealer here.
And obviously, part of the thing that's kind of fed the market here is the fact that it is difficult and has been difficult to import from the United States in the last few years, and also the relative complexity of transitioning between the metric and imperial designs. And obviously, Captain Slug was one of the first people to really metricize his design and make sure that it was transferable around the world, which is probably one of the reasons why the Caliburn's been so influential.
Yeah, the Caliburn has just been a great piece of design because it has been super easy to convert to metric hardware, and it's just a very cheap blaster hardware-wise to get compared to a lot of flywheel builds where you're going to need motors and batteries and switches and all the electronics to build something there, where the Caliburn just a piece of bunch of metal you slap together with a bit of plastic and 200 FPS Springer.
Yeah, and obviously that simplicity has allowed for a lot of different iterations, and it's a design that's really developed. And he's kept it largely modular so that you can revise the design. And have you found a lot of coming back for additions and for changes with the Caliburn?
I've got a few varieties of the caliber. And I have the Megaburn U behind me, and then I have a caliber out on the shelf, and then I've had a couple of Talon claws as well, which are the same platform. But yeah, Slug has definitely done a great job of keeping the hardware very standard. So you can just swap between builds, and like the same with the U bars on there, they're the same for all the full length blasters, even though they fire different calibers of ammunition.
Really clever, and I think that's been a big contributing factor to the success of that platform. Has been its versatility, and it's been adapted to fire pretty much everything, hasn't it?
I think we're still missing an Ultra Burn, and then the legendary Vortex Burn.
And Vortex is one of those things that's a very tricky ammunition to adapt. And obviously, I'm sure that there's somebody somewhere with the files for that lurking around. It's just getting it to work is always the tricky part. Now, where do you see the European market heading in the next couple of years? I mean, obviously, you've had the links come in, and you were the first person to print those.
The European market has grown quite a bit over the last year. Like I've mostly been following and also kind of spearheading the Danish scene, where we're now actually starting to be able to host weekend events instead of just a few hours. So we're hosting a big event in a couple of weeks on a LARP site that we are loaning for that, which is going to be awesome.
And do you find that those bigger sites are sort of pushing a demand for more of an ultra stock level of power, as opposed to the old super stock power levels that we would do in maybe smaller venues?
The site we're getting is quite. It's both indoors and outdoors, and the outdoor sidelines are quite long. So a high power blaster is great to have there, but the indoors is very close quarters, so you don't actually need that much high power, but it's always fun to have.
See, there's been a big growth in since Flywheel the World flywheels have come out. There's been a big growth in those smaller and automatic style blasters as well. Obviously, those play well in a load of different places as well as just side-ons. Are you seeing a lot of demand for those kind of grass snake type builds?
I've actually only built a single grass snake as a commission here, but they've mostly been very finicky to get to work in my experience. So my Griffin is almost the same size if you chop the battery off and lob it on the side, and that fires way more reliably, which is
obviously the Griffin is a good flywheel platform. And is that again has benefited from a lot of community input and development and different shapes, and you can make that in a number of different configurations.
Yeah, the full-on open source nature of Griffin just makes it so we've got parts for just about everything on it now. If you want angle talons or dual stage or thumbhole stocks, there's so many great parts for that blaster, and it's really easy. Very well designed, no support needed when printing. Hardware is easy to get, and it's super easy to put together.
Has the trouble getting filaments affected what you're trying to do in production wise? Because I know over here there's been a bit of a battle to get filament.
I've not really noticed any sort of decrease in the filament over the last year on the pandemic here at all, which has been quite nice. There's been a few times where colors have been out of stock, but not like the ones I've heard from the UK where there's just no filament at all available.
And we've suffered a bit of a double whammy in that we've done part of this. We've inflicted upon ourselves with some very foolish political decisions that we're not going to bother talking about. But obviously, the ability for people to create a design and then basically export it anywhere in the world as a file or as a licensed print that people can print has obviously helped creators a lot, and has definitely helped diversity with community blasters. We're not relying on just a disseminated design now. You can actually just get the files, can't you?
Yeah, there's a lot of designers of blasters that have moved to selling files instead of just hardware kits, which if you take something like the Gecko I have here, all the hardware is super easy to get. It's M3 screws and a couple of inserts, and literally every piece of it can be had from AliExpress. So anywhere in the world you can get the hardware and build one of these. Which is...
And what's the performance like on a lot of those blasters with minimal hardware where they're nearly print?
The Gecko shoots like, depending on configuration, from like 120 to 140 FPS, depending on spring and barrel length, which is absolutely perfect for a sidearm or just running in a lower FPS war. And it's a lot of fun to use with the kind of blowback it has.
And the Spamf has also been quite successful, hasn't it? And modifications thereof. But we've seen some of those in Europe, but not lots and lots.
Yeah. Gavin Fossey released the Spamf file set as well as a hardware kit, which is super awesome because the barrel material was hard to get. But I got the files early and started printing them, so I had to adapt them to take the barrel material available here, which took some time, but was quite easy to do. And now you can just head to the hardware shop down the road and just pick up all the materials and need to build one of those.
So we've overcome a lot of the issues that used to happen where with the old homemade designs, they were very country dependent. And do you think 3D printing and the wider availability of 3D printing has really driven that change so that rather than just, because a few years ago, it was quite hard to produce a really reliable, strong, and like nerf-proof print at home.
It definitely has changed everything. Like, I've never been able to find stuff like good barrel material or plunger material here, or the matching O-rings, which have been available in abundance in the US. So we haven't had any way to build a high-powered blaster in the same way we do now, where we just both get files to print exactly the parts we need and then have the hardware available and just get shipped completely pre-done.
Obviously makes a big difference to being able to change things and alter things as well. And that if you need to make a revision to the design, it's very easy to just revise it in the CAD and then release a revised file, and people can just print the part that's changed or evolved.
Yeah, it has really helped. Like all the people who makes either step files or fusion files available for easy tweaking. It's just awesome to have something that's so easy to work with to get the exact blaster you want to have. Like throwing logos or names or adding a few more details or smoothing out stuff you don't want on your grid, just stuff like that.
Now, what do you think? Obviously, the Caliburn's very influential, but what is your favourite community blaster? Which one do you like the most personally?
Currently, it's got to be my FDL, which is an amazing blaster through and through. It's great, very, very well performing and just works. As well as the Lynx, now the metric V2 Lynx I've got here, which is definitely my favorite Springer blaster available. It's so easy to put together and it just works.
That the V2 Lynx that obviously there was revisions to, wasn't there, between that and the V1?
Yeah. The V1 was a bit more blocky and yeah, the V2 looks a lot better, and especially since it had got the barrel shrouds available. Just put that here to the bare metal, which really helps with the look of it.
Now you're going to make me buy another one. Now, where do you see community blasters developing? What do you think in the next, if you were to say, ignoring the pandemic and seeing the return of games, where do you think it's going to go from here?
I've been following some of the ultrasonic developments, and now since he's coming out with both motors and the ESCs that are completely pre-done, you're going to have almost drop-in brushless motor kits coming out very shortly, I believe. So taking the flywheel blasters to the next step. That's probably the biggest new thing I can see coming.
So the ability for a flywheeler to be as simple to assemble as a Springer, where you have minimal soldering and minimal electronics that you have to put together, where it's just a matter of plugging a set of components together or wiring a set of components rather than starting from scratch and having to program it or having to get an Arduino-based situation and then having to adapt ESCs from another application and use those. The nerf-specific stuff that's coming out, you reckon it's going to mean that it'll be as easy do that is to do a caliber.
Yeah, in general, just more advanced blasters, like we've seen with the FDLs having displays to be able to adjust things on the fly. Or ultrasonic blaster has that as well, and we've seen a few more in the works projects coming up that has that ability to just be very versatile in how you're using the blaster.
Excellent, and that brings us quite neatly into Andrew's segment. Hopefully he will hear me and he can come and bring himself back in. Obviously he's got a number of blasters. Hello. We can't see you at the moment, unless my connection is slow. I don't know if your camera is on.
Says it is.
Okay, it might just be my connection slowing down a little bit. I'm not pedaling fast enough again. And if you're visible to everyone else, it doesn't matter whether you're visible to me, I can go straight into the segment. So obviously Nicholas was talking about these kind of more technologically advanced blasters that do a couple of different things, and a number of your designs have actually had multiple barrels, haven't they, and other stuff. So I thought that was a good opportunity to bring you in. If I start where I did with Nicholas, by just introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about what you do in case they've been living in a cave for the last 2 years and didn't know what you were about.
So my name's Andrew, and I just love to design kind of new things. And so then I started designing and selling some things to friends and my people. So I kind of started Atch Attachments as like a kind of brand or logo or whatnot. And then since then, again, there's so many cool things you see people developing in like the nerf community and whatnot, and it keeps kind of like pushing us up. So I keep thinking, oh, well, what's something like new that can like give me an edge or something like that. So that always kind of pushes me to try and develop something. So I kind of a bit of an edge over people in nerf games. So it's a bit of a fun challenge. So that's why I just kind of keep trying to design the things that haven't maybe been done yet.
For you, it was always the excitement of playing games and the kind of wanting to create something that was unique and that was different and also performed better was what drove you to get into developing these blasters.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, I think also through, it's kind of a combination. Like I like to design stuff, but what's so great we all know about nerf is then you get to actually go and use it. But then just using stuff, experiencing the games, that a lot of the time is what pops stuff into your mind, like, oh, this didn't work out so well, or it would have been much better if I could have done this in that situation. And so then you go away thinking, what can I make, what can I change that will fix that, and that kind of gives a lot of inspiration for me.
So that's an interesting view as well, in that games driving development of blasters. I think we've probably seen that in the States with some of the 5v5 and some of the more competitive ultra stock games that they've run. That certainly kick-started a whole host of developments over there in terms of new stuff. And obviously, technology has come to our aid in terms of the cost of 3D printers going down and the improvements to the quality of home 3D printers and generally, better stuff. And what was the first community blaster that you were really aware of and that kind of got you interested in the idea of making your own?
Well, I guess, pushing me to make my own was probably the Pigeon from Mr. Heathpants. When those small half-dart mags came out, I kind of realised there's a lot of new stuff we can do here. And I just sort of made upgrade parts until that point. So that was the first point where I decided to try and make my own pistol and whatnot. And the Pigeon was really good. So I tried to maybe take a different tact and use mini brushless motors in my own, which is, I have this one here, the Komodo, whatnot. But
and obviously we've benefited. Go on.
I was saying, that was just the start of me realising that actually it'd be alright to make like a whole blaster, because I used to think like in the mindset like, oh, something like this, that's the biggest thing I can print, because that takes like 5 hours and that's a really long time. But then once I was like, oh, it's fine, take 3 days, print a few parts, it's actually reasonable to make something bigger.
Yeah, so you just got your head around the technology. The design aspect was never the problem. What put you off was the time it was going to take to turn that into something complete.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, those mini brushless motors, we've benefited a little bit from the rules on quads because they've driven a lot of market in the sub 250 gram quad arena, which uses really small, like 1506 and 1300 size Bell motors. And those are quite handy. They're a good replacement for a lot of those smaller nerf motors that we've been running.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I don't know a load about the quads. What's been really handy is reaching out to people like Airzone in, I think, New Zealand or whatnot, who have a lot more experience, and I probably have like some ideas. I'd really like to use a brushless motor in this or that way, but then when I'm a bit out of my depth on things, I can always just kind of reach out to the community and get their input to help me kind of finish projects. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, and that the community as a resource is massive, isn't it? And I think we're very fortunate in the Nerf community to have some hugely talented and inventive people to call on who aren't shy about sharing the knowledge that they have. And so you think that sharing of knowledge and the ability of people to collaborate across continents, time zones, and all the rest of it is easily been as important as the technology itself?
I think massively. Just the fact that we're talking a lot more. Kind of in the design phase, people are normally sharing stuff rather than just when they finished it. I mean, at least to me, I've built like a basic HPA blaster, but now I'm trying to upgrade it with like certain kind of code and Arduinos and whatnot. It's great to be able to speak to like say like Spectre, who's made the supercore, and kind of ask him more of the technical questions to see like how far I can maybe do something new with it, or not, just like understand the parts more. Yeah, it's like that's just helpful.
And so that's quite a big sea change, because we did go through a period of time where people were really guarding their knowledge and they were not thinking about releasing anything until they had a finished product. And some of that's a hangover from the older way of doing things, where people would develop something in a closed shop and then they would debut it and they would present it as a fully finished product. And that's obviously, I mean, BritNerf never worked like that as a community. When we developed things, we were lucky in that people within the scene were happy to share their knowledge, and that people didn't take that as use that to their advantage. So you've had no problems with anything of yours that you've passed to people. Nobody's let it out or developed it or then tried to claim it.
No, not really. I'd say it's always really nice to help give people, like you say, the knowledge to then take that and use it to make their own thing, not just immediately copy it. So yeah, helping people out and giving them pointers on things is great, because then you get to see a bit more innovation, people doing things a different way to you. And I think in general with the community's been really good at, now that we're kind of sharing files and new designs, have been like respecting the people that are creating these. I think we've come to like understand a lot more what it takes and the amount of time it takes to be developing, printing stuff, iterating again and again. So yeah, I think that's been really great as well.
So that's more of a sign of the growing maturity in terms of the community has got to a certain kind of stage now where the overall view is that if you must respect people's designs, they'll ask for input and help, and if you have specialist knowledge, you can give that knowledge to people to help them, and then you can also draw on them in return. And that is a real big bonus, and that's definitely helped creators.
Yeah, and I think even if you take something and maybe you're really relying on someone else's kind of innovation or something, and you actually want to sell that or make a bit of a business through it, people normally will give like 10% or something to whoever's kind of put into that project and whatnot. So that works really well. And something else has been really good is some of these people, well, like Viking Foam and also Frontline Foam in America, who are willing to try and print and produce these things so that the wider community can get them, has been very helpful, because a lot of designers might just not have the ability to make that much stuff, and so they might have a cool design that's just been sitting on their laptop for like a year, don't really know what to do with it or anything like that. So yeah, these people that are also helping to manufacture the blasters are really, really helping to let the whole community kind of get their hands on things, which after that will then inspire more people to make more new things, and it just kind of keeps the cycle going.
Yeah, and that ability to have that bigger scale production, because 3D printing was always limited at home about the amount, like you were saying, about the amount of time that it takes to produce parts. And obviously that's been a big bonus for everybody, hasn't it? And we're into the last kind of 9 or 10 minutes. I've got one more question for Andrew, and then I'll bring Nicholas back in. So if you were to use your crystal ball and kind of gaze into the future, what do you think you're going to see in maybe between this Foam Fest and the next Foam Fest, which will obviously be face to face? How do you think you're going to see community blasters develop in that time?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. So I feel like in the last few years I've seen so much be done. Flywheels, HP, or whatnot. It seems to me like everything I can think of, someone's made that kind of blaster. So I'm not saying that nothing new can be done, but I'm saying it's probably going to blow me away, whatever it is. Because at the moment, I feel like everything I can think of has been done. So the next new thing that's going to come in, it's probably going to be crazy, and everyone's going to be like, "Oh, I didn't really think of that." I don't know. But yeah, 3D printed, or maybe people are getting a lot more into getting hardware kits, being able to use metal and long rods and whatnot, and that can allow you to do more things where maybe the strength of 3D printed parts won't let you do that. I guess also combining technology together, so adding in Arduino, 2 flywheels, 2 springers and whatnot. People are now kind of, instead of having separate blasters in those different fields, are combining those together to kind of take the strengths of everything. I think we'll probably see a lot more of that.
We've obviously got the first kind of beginnings of 3D printed bases with a kind of an AEG type system, haven't we, this year? And we've already had some full auto HPA stuff. So I'll bring Nicholas back in again. And so between the two of you, anything that you think of that we haven't talked about, of what you're up to?
Oh, like personally? Or?
Yeah. I mean, did we forget anything that, there's anything that you've got that you want to talk about that you've got in development for the next kind of 6 to 12 months that maybe might not have been released elsewhere? Or if people haven't seen it, what would you like to shout about? And I'll bring in Nicholas first. You got anything that you want to shout about?
I'm finishing my exams next week for electronics, and then I've got some projects I'm working on, including easy drop-in solenoid full auto board for flywheel blasters. And then I'll be getting both the Venturi and the Spring Thunder for sale in the store sometime down the road when I've get the conversions worked out for those. And hopefully also getting the Spring Thunder Dutch cushioned Sobig in here for those who want a bit longer blaster.
For taller people.
Yeah. You can see it was designed by a Dutch guy, because I can't probably use it. I'm not tall enough.
Good. Yeah.
So
I've also
there's some exciting stuff. Finished work commitments, and we could. Go on, Andrew.
Yeah. So I guess one kind of mostly new thing I've been working on for a while is there's this new kind of pusher design. If they have here, that I've been working on, and I haven't kind of released it out that much yet because I'm trying to work on the reliability of it. But yeah, it's basically an ultra compact auto pusher with no trigger. Yeah, so this the motor's here at the back. It spins this red kind of hollow cylinder, and there's a little cam path in there. So as that red cylinder will spin around, the yellow pusher will kind of reciprocate. So yeah, ultra small, really compact, but I'm trying to get rid of any sort of resistance or whatnot, because the torque of the motor is just enough to make the whole thing spin, and so I've had to play around with tolerances, putting some kind of grease in there and whatnot. But yeah, that will allow you to do, I think, much smaller things. What it allowed me to make was this guy, Baslax. So it's essentially an HPA blaster, but within the front here, I've added a flywheel section, and inside of here is where I had the space to put that pusher, where just no other kind of auto pusher would have fit. he's really, really thin and whatnot. So that's allowed me to do, like I said, new designs that I wasn't able to do before. So I'm hoping to make that a lot more reliable, so when people around the world are printing it, they don't have to be super technical and they can just make it work.
And obviously that could fill that void where currently in mixed games where you have ultra stock on the outside of buildings and then you have to go to a lower FPS level inside, or if you've got a slower rate of fire on your HPA, you've got that quick zip from the flywheel section underneath.
Yeah, that's literally why I designed it, because I needed, I was running into that situation on games, so yeah, I needed that.
We are very nearly at the commercial break, so thank you very much to Andrew and Nicholas, and that is Atch Attachments and Viking Foam Arms. Do keep an eye on their web stores, and obviously both of you have web stores that you release your products on, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
And you guys are on Etsy, or have you just got a generic platform?
.com. Website.
Yeah, I've moved off of Etsy now, so just atchattachments.co.uk.
And
brilliant. Okay, so do keep an eye on those, and obviously support community makers, because if you're supporting community makers, you're supporting them making and growing things, and it's always good if you are in Europe. You can cut a lot of the expense of importing from abroad out by going direct to European sellers and helping to grow the hobby over here. And obviously they're using the designs from the States, and they're supporting the creators. So do keep supporting our local producers and creators.
Now on Foam Fest Live, we go back to Tom from Foam Data Services, who is joined by Frontline Foam and Fusion Blasters.
I've just slid sideways into another room, another space with two more creators and producers. So I have Derek from Frontline Foam and Pete, aka Fusion, who runs a number of little subsidiaries and is a keen activist and player and distributor in the UK. And is probably the nearest physical nerf business to where I live, which is still a good way away. But that's his claim to fame, is that he's probably shot more high power darts than anyone else in the southwest of England. So I'm going to go across to Derek first, and obviously we went into kind of the segment before. If I ask the same kind of questions, so Derek, what got you into community blasters? What was the first community blaster you were exposed to?
Right, so first community blaster was me in my garage some 12 years ago. I was like a 12-year-old kid building, the snap bows, the rainbow pistols, so PVC, hardware stored, basic supplies, spring off Big Master kind of stuff.
So you started on the traditional Nerf Haven homemades, because obviously you're a US native and you had access to their amazing aerial plumbing, and it's wonderful kind of cross section of all the parts to make all the power and a good bower material. What kind of drove you to then get into what you're doing now?
Overgrown hobby is the best thing I could say is what it is. Started with, PVC homemades, and I was selling some of those, on Nerf Haven. And I guess word got out and popularity increased, and Nerf itself as a hobby has increased exponentially over the past 10 years. And so demand has skyrocketed and couldn't keep up with demand. So I moved into a larger place, and then a larger place. I think we moved 4 or 5 times in the past year or year and a half or so. And so now we're, larger scale, medium scale 3D printing, machine shop-esque, producing old hardware to own prints and helping designers that reach out to give them feedback in their designs as well.
Obviously, you're running essentially a production facility for other designs at the moment, and people can come to you with designs who need production, and you can either produce for them under license, or you can also do prototyping services as well.
Do some prototyping. Recently, it's been really busy. I haven't quite had the time I'd like to play around as much as I ideally would like to. But as we're working on smoothing out our processes and streamlining things in the shop, I'll have more time to take on more of those projects. Thinking back over, 2 years ago when MHP Arms came out with the Pigeon, he and I went back and forth quite a bit to get that in the state it is now. And now we're selling, a few pigeons a week, and that's demand for that and supply has been good. Demand's been good, and the popularity of the Pigeon hasn't really decreased at all. And so that's an example of a design that we've taken from, MHP typically builds a design as one-off or builds a few, but getting that from building a few to building, a few hundred is kind of a big step. And so we a lot of the designers that do license or contract or contact me, getting the design to a production state takes a little bit of work as well. And I'm sure other designers have seen that as well from their own designs, their own iterations.
So what's driven the growth of your business and your kind of supply has been the actual physical growth of the number of games and the number of players and the general exposure of Nerf as a whole. And what do you think has been really driving that? Is it a chicken and egg situation?
Yeah, I think a lot of it stems from Nerf was originally seen, and this is my opinion, of course, of Nerf was seen as, for kids. I remember on Nerf Haven, it was like, Nerf was not very mainstream. It was out there for kids, but then the higher level, more competitive, more custom niche of a hobby was very small. And as word continues to grow, people see that Nerf isn't just for kids. And if you look at even Hasbro itself and Dart Zone, their marketing is targeting an older crowd. So they're also shifting their marketing segment to the older, maybe more competitive group. And that's kind of what I've seen grow Frontline Foam as well, is changing the mindset of, hey, Nerf is actually for everybody. Nerf is fun. You can do it outside. You can do it anywhere. And then when you're trying to throw an HPA into that, it's almost a little bit taking a different, even more competitive approach as well. And so you get some people on both sides of high powered 300, 400 FPS, and then some people just
level that's set really by the production of the equipment, whereas Nerf is flexible, and so we've been able to produce equipment at lots of different power levels and lots of entry levels in terms of cost.
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. The variety and the versatility of what Nerf, the hobby, is very appealing. And as word gets out and it spreads, that appeal just continues to spread as well.
There's a degree of that feeding, it's the snake that feeds on itself, where because of the variety, that is inspiring creators to keep creating things. And we're in a really beneficial spiral right now where there are a lot of creators coming into the hobby, creating new things and designing new things. And that's inspiring other people to create new things. And it's also inspiring players to join, which is fueling the creators. So do you think that is a sustainable model for growth at the moment?
Sustainable model growth for the hobby as a whole. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I'd say you'll have some hardcores that are in it for like competitive play, and there are some people who prefer a blaster that you can just buy and works and play. But I still think a large portion of the growth in the hobby will be from that spiral of creativity, when people can come in and maybe not even just creativity in the blasters and designs, but also creativity in gameplay has a big force in that as well. I was talking to somebody about paintball, and the paintball industry is more or less kind of dying out, but the niches in the paintball industry that are still doing well is because they do have that kind of variety as well. So it's not just doing the same thing over and over again. So in the play and in the designs, I think that's both fueling kind of the growth. And as, again, more people come into the hobby, more minds, more variety, more creativity, and we'll see where we can go from there. I'm not really sure where it will plateau out at, but I think the sky's the limit with all the new technology and all the new designers and the creativity coming out, that we're kind of just barely scratching the surface.
And I think that's been a really exciting period. If you look at since Elite dropped back in the day, and Hasbro kind of took their game to the next level, and that inspired a whole generation of people to get started into it. And then on top of that, obviously the availability of 3D printing and the growth of 3D printing, and then the growth of the maker hobby in general, has made a big difference to that. What challenges do you think community developed blasters are going to face in the future? And creators, what sort of challenges are creators saying to you? What's their biggest blocks to getting things made?
For getting things made, it would be what people have echoed before, is if you want to get something made on a larger scale. I think a lot of people who are creative, just by a matter of human nature and personality, is the more creative you are, typically less industrious you are. And so these creative minds typically, not in every case, but generally have a harder time implementing and scaling up their ideas. I mean, that's standard in entrepreneurship as well, businesses. And so a big block would be getting the creative people to connect with the people who are maybe more industrious and have maybe a mind for a larger scale. And I've seen that again with like MHP arms and Freedom blasters, and even like Atch attachments, and a lot of different designers will not have the capability of producing very large because maybe they're not as committed to making that into a larger scale thing for them. So a lot of, like, it's a hobby space, and so a lot of hobbyists will keep it small because there's a lot less stress, believe me, in keeping a hobby small and doing it on your own. And as soon as you start to try to scale it up, you're going to hit all those obstacles, even on like your own front. And so I am kind of admired by Captain Slug and Sheldon King Blasters who've managed to do that, but they're going to be, I think they're going to be capped again, and we've seen that in the past, limited by their own success, you could say, is as you grow, you have to have the infrastructure to grow with you at a sustainable rate. A lot of businesses fail because they grow too fast and they can't keep up, they don't have the structure in place, and then some businesses don't grow just because they stay small. And balancing those two out, I think, is going to be the biggest issue or obstacle that I see in the hobby as a whole. And you mentioned designers specifically, so I think that would be viable.
And do you see other people getting into the space that you're in the next 2 or 3 years? Because the market's probably big enough to support. I mean, if you look in Europe, we've got some smaller versions of kind of what you're doing. Do you think your model's repeatable?
Yeah, definitely. In fact,
down that you've got a good, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying that I would encourage more people to try to take that risk, and the hobby can only grow from that. I was thinking about what role does, say, manufacturing or production on a larger scale fit in with designers and hobbyists, and that fit is where a designer, again, will make a one-off design or a couple, maybe a dozen or two, but on a larger scale, you're going to see issues that would appear that you would not see if you were kept on a smaller, even a medium scale. And so I see that with a lot of designs. Someone will come to me saying, hey, will you sell this? I'll try to build one and be like, the difference between like a mechanical engineer and a manufacturing engineer is like you come up with the idea, then you have to make the deal reality, and there's that disconnect. And so the more people that we have who are trying to kind of maybe mass produce one idea, the more solid that idea is. And I am a big believer in that open source aspect of the hobby. That's why 3D printing has excelled to this point, is because the design and those advancements were made public. And so we had an exponential growth in availability and price and quality of 3D printing because it was shared. And so as designers share with manufacturers and vice versa, keep it open source, then that is going to do amazing things for the growth of the hobby as a whole. If you want to see more creative designers and you want to see more designs that are also producible, if designers want to see designs in the hands of people, you have to have that connection. And in a hobby or in a business or whatever it is, even in a relationship, in a marriage, that's kind of, in my mind, how that works. So.
Well, that brings us quite neatly into talking to Pete, because he's been sitting there waiting and listening patiently. So I'll come back and we'll have a little kind of roundup at the end. And I'll ask, in fact, just before we go to Pete, is there anything that you've got that's in the pipeline that maybe hasn't come to a wider audience yet that you'd like to kind of bring up?
There's so many things I couldn't tell you. My main job here at Frontline Home is supposed to be research and development, product design, and I've got right now a list of ideas that's 50 different ideas long. But to sum it up, I mean, I've got, you guys probably, I'm going to actually see how this works going into this kind of mode, the salty mode. I've got a couple of M79s from Milsig and Foam Night, an XC by Foam Night, as well as like the zinc. Pete and I talked about Neutrino, and there's a lot of designs out there that are not yet kind of mainstream in the hobby that we're working on getting there. And so things are in the works. The M79 Milsig is basically HPA, but it's semi-auto, full auto, accuracy, high power. So I can Pete about that. That really is for that competitive line of people who wants to not have to worry about a blaster. And you'll hear more about it, in the future. There's a lot of things in the works. And as more designers come with more interesting designs, more creative designs, I think that there's a lot of potential. I mean, I'm thinking of, we haven't seen a lot of, I'm still debating the practicality of like a wrist-mounted system, like an Iron Man system in a war, but that's kind of a novelty idea. It's not practical, but also it's just super fun. So some things are competitive and high-powered, like the M79, and some things are just fun, like the Foam Night. And so bridging those two gaps together, I think, is what at least I'm trying to do in my own time in the hobby space here.
Well, it's lots of stuff to look forward to. So I'm going to go across to Pete. Pete, I'll start with a kind of similar deal to what I did for Derek. And kind of, how did you get started in community blasters, and where did you end up in this crazy journey of having to spend your spare time supplying air tanks to random people all over the UK and lots of other parts and pieces?
Well, we in the UK have had like quite a different experience to in the US, that we've kind of missed all that home build kind of area that kind of happened there. So for us, I'd say Atch, I didn't know him at the time, but he was producing a lot of parts, and they'd be the sort of things that you'd buy as like printed pieces that you could buy online, because most people at the time didn't really have printers. So that was some of the things going on. James so Jim Jam, who just won the quiz earlier, started putting together a metric hardware kit for the Caliburn. And really for us in the UK, we were kind of always limited to 130 FPS games. So we were always kind of sticking to nerf stuff. It was always based on toys. But when we had the higher FPS games, the Ultra Stock, like you mentioned earlier, we kind of started pushing forward into things like Caliburns, and they were actually a useful thing to have in the UK, rather than just being, oh, it would be cool to build one of these. You can actually go and use it at some of these games. So we kind of had a little bit of a mini boom then, I'd say. So James running the hardware kits for the Caliburns was really helpful. Jack Rabbit Nerfer, Dan, created the Lepus, which I think is beginning to just take off, even though it's been around for quite a while now. So I think it was in 2019. And then Naroda, another member in Europe, built his build pup that's HBA build pup that's got quite popular now. And then Dan created a few other things as well, like the Bullwhip as well, which is pretty taken off, that one. I think that was one of the most popular ones. And then in terms of HBA stuff, kind of where we've got to now, I'd say Atch has obviously got his blasters going on at the moment, which over at Frontline Foam are pretty popular as well. And then Dan's got his Waymaker and Shadowmaker, so pretty progressed pretty quickly, I would say.
Been really great to see UK creators kind of stepping up and getting their stuff out there. Actually, we've got quite a lot of our market is being filled by our own creators in many ways.
Yeah, it's really cool. It was really nice to see Herb as well starting machining some of the parts as well. So I was talking to Spectre over in Australia shortly after the Specs VZ came out, and Nicky, a friend of his who he plays with, kind of designed what we call the Spirit Breach. So it first of all involved drilling out the you got example here, but drilling out a Specs VZ and put two smaller kind of sizes of brass inside. I kind of brought that over here and took the idea, made it a little bit more popular, because I think Nicky had used it for just one particular build as an idea, and I jumped on that. I thought it was amazing.
And a telescopic bolt, is that?
Yeah,
essentially?
Yeah, basically. So I'm not going to take any credit for it because it's not my idea at all, but the only tweak I made was I just went with a slightly smaller brass size so you could glue it in rather than having to drill out the Specs VZ in the first place. But yeah, it basically is a telescoping bolt with a
and that
worker
gives you the
pusher on the end.
That gives you the draw length without having to have a long single piece bolt that draws right the way back. You can have a full length draw, an easier half length.
Absolutely, and you can also and you can also insert mags and release them even with a closed bolt, which is really nice. But Herb took that further, and he's machined some metal ones as well, which has been really nice for mag-fed Specs VZ blasters. So that's another cool thing.
Obviously, you've had kind of an interesting personal journey in the hobby. I mean, you came in pretty early. You're one of the guinea pigs for FFS, which is one of the biggest high-powered games in the UK. And in fact, you were at the very, very first non-public one. You had one of because you were into the high-powered Springers and some of the high-power air blasters before a lot of other people, because we were building, like you were saying earlier, mostly sub 130, because that's where the games were at when we were first getting going. I mean, you've had a long history with high power stuff. You had the first. Yours was the first. What was that long shot based one that came out a while ago?
Exus 2.
Yeah, you had the very first Exus that I saw in the UK after the one that we saw at. But you had the first one that I saw being used in games.
And one of the first.
Yeah, and because I saw that one at, I had that in hand at the Tech Day that we ran, which was a long time ago. And I remember also there's another piece of history you've got down there, which is an illustration of how far things have come. If you want to show people that, because it's an amazing piece, just explain it to people where it started.
Yeah, so this is kind of where Spectre was going with his HPA stuff. So not that I can get it out or show you inside, but inside of here I've got one of the original XBZ, very hard not to say Specs VZ now, but XBZ plastic tanks, which were quite commonly used. So what I've done is I kind of lopped off the old handle and I've put the pump inside of the stock. So to essentially pump it up, you just press in the stop point and you can pump it up this way. And then the trigger, I've made a little linkage before I got into 3D printing that kind of presses the little button on the tank. And then it's a brass breech actually installed. It's kind of like a reverse one. So to open it, you slide it forward and then close it back this way. But yeah, pumping it up. And I think this was probably the first thing that we managed to crack to about 300. Because at the time, all the long shots were kind of maybe 200, 250. I know people can push them further now. But yeah, this was pretty cool, and just not that I use it because it's totally untouched. You pump it up, then you got to load it up and then fire it, and you probably missed that one shot. So that's a bit of a problem. But yeah, that kind of was where Spectre went with their Specs VZ. So I've got the metal tank variant now, which does the same, but it's a lot more reliable, and it won't explode because it's not made of plastic. So these are, really nice.
Obviously, those have had a huge impact on the global HPA growth, really, because it meant people didn't have to adapt or use plastic tanks, and they were designed to fit in place of those tanks. And now, obviously, with the semi-auto tanks and valving and stuff that's available, it's much easier to build a safe and reliable HPA setup at home, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that, I guess, is the Alpha Trooper I had there. I guess is classed as an LPA setup. But yeah, like you said, basically you get all the internals, very reliable parts. I know the supercores are a little bit more tricky than the Specs BZ, but the Specs BZ literally can't go wrong with it. But that basically now means that if you're building or designing a HPA blaster, you're basically just making a shell. There's no way I could design a Springer or a Flywheeler like some of my friends have done. So to me, I've just done a really simple blaster, kind of very foolproof, because it's just a shell. It just holds the pieces. That's all it does. There's no moving parts.
Yeah. That's actually, it allowed creativity of you being able to create things where I can think of things all day long, but I don't necessarily have the capacity to do CAD and turn that into a viable file that I can have something made from. And I think the collaborative approach and the way that we're able to produce things does mean that, like you were saying, you can just have an idea, and if you want just to make a shell, you can now just make a shell and not have to worry about the internals because someone else will supply those.
Yeah, so now it's if you're designing a supercore based blaster, it's just kind of what shape do you want it to be? Where do you want the bottle? How long do you want it? Do you want it a ball pat? Do you not? That kind of stuff. So I think one of your questions that you had prepared was about the idea of what are the problems of developing a blaster, and I think the main problem is really trying to find something that's unique that hasn't been necessarily done before. So I think if you look at a lot of things coming out, they are all fairly different to one another, unless they're being developed at the same time and they just happen to be kind of a similar idea at the same time.
And that diversity in the nerf hobby and in the nerf creative side of the hobby and in the creators themselves has been really cool, because it does mean that, I think pretty much, yes, everyone's caliber may look vaguely the same, but when you part them together, when we've been at FFS, I've not really seen two people with an identical setup.
Yeah, definitely agree. You got people with like different rails and stuff, different colours help as well. Obviously, everything I have is teal usually, but yeah, you can see a lot of variety.
You can, and I think that's one of the fun things about it, in that there's not really a meta for that. And there's still room for like wacky stuff or individual stuff or unusual stuff or even downright deliberately uncompetitive stuff. If the game is balanced and set up right, people still use blowpipes occasionally at our games and stuff like that, which is, yeah, and it's a lot of fun. It hasn't taken, because people concerned about raising the power level. I mean, I'm well known for having a kind of, my personal feelings are that we're getting towards the top level of what I consider to be nerf, and beyond that you're kind of venturing into stuff that not only is hard to regulate in some countries but is kind of potentially illegal in some countries, and we've done pretty well at that 250 to 300 tops level. Has worked well for us, and we're lucky that paintball and airsoft fields have been really happy to collaborate with us as game organisers and ensure that. I think that that's going to be a challenge in the future. Almost is going to be, where do you stop?
Yeah, well, not that you could see me, but my eyebrows definitely went up when Derek mentioned 300 to 400. And I was a bit like, wow, yeah, no, we haven't experienced that over here. But I think, like you said, the 300 limit where we are is definitely comfortable. You can have a very competitive game like that.
And off those list of questions, if I missed any, what I was going to say was, if you were to gaze into your crystal ball, I've asked some of the others too, and think about like where we might end up in 12 months' time. Obviously, if we ignore the pandemic and the list of games and stuff, and that we just see that gets dealt with, and that we can carry on playing, where do you think we're going to be in 12 months' time?
Well, having played just the other day at Games of Foam, I think you can really see the step up that we've had. Like there were a lot more like lynxes around and springers like that, but also the amount of HPA. Like, I was really surprised that normally we'd kind of turn up to an event and it might just be a handful of us really, and actually it was quite popular. So I think there'll definitely be the differences in classes of games where you've got ultra stock, super stock, and stock sort of thing. But in terms of what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought there. But in terms of being able to bring anything along, like, you can still be super competitive with a strife and stuff like that, because you have the rate of fire, and I think there will always be an element of being able to kind of turn up with anything and still play. But there will definitely be that a bit more higher level spec stuff there, I would say.
done pretty well about not allowing a meta to develop. I think game organisers in this country in particular, partly because we have to be a bit more regulated because of our laws and our legal requirements, have been very good at keeping games fair, in terms of, I've never felt, there's been the odd day where I've struggled, I was downside of Jim Jam, when he got his initial HPA rifle working with the suppressor, and that was not a fun experience where I was nicely illuminated and he basically spent the whole game using me for target practice. Yeah. But that's like half player, half. But aside from situations like that where you're just plain unlucky with conditions, I think that our games largely have kept the playing field pretty level in terms of being able to turn up. And do you see any issues with that happening? Would HPA become too dominant, do you think?
I do. I think it's got a bit of maybe a bad reputation. People are a little bit scared about using HPA, but it really isn't that bad. Well, I know we've only got a short bit of time left, so I thought, while answering that question, I can also show you kind of what I've been designing in the meantime, and maybe kind of put a few people's minds at rest in terms of how complicated HPA and stuff is.
Yes, please bring that straight in. Yeah, we want to see.
I do just leave my webcam down like that. This is the neutrino, and this is what I've designed. And like I mentioned earlier, the idea of this is to be like a super simple blaster, kind of a foolproof one that you can toollessly disassemble. So you'll probably know at the moment I'm just taking this apart with no tools whatsoever. But kind of linking back to your question that you just asked, there's not a lot to it really. So I've got a barrel in here. So if I just remove that part, I remove those. It's just really quite basic. So this is essentially all that's in there. Because I've got a supercore, a valve, which is essentially the trigger, and my line here that comes in. So this, at the moment, to get about 250 FPS, I run this at about 48 PSI. Okay, so bike tyres are around that sort of pressure. So there's no danger there. The only danger is with the tank, and they're all, they've got their certificates on them, and they're all regulated that way. So in terms of us meddling with stuff, the worst thing that can happen is a hose splits and it leaks out at 40, 50 PSI, which is certainly getting a puncture on your bike. So I think if the stigma behind HPA goes, I think people will really kind of pick it up a bit more and not think it's so dominating, because all blasters have their kind of pros and cons. Like flywheelers are loud, but you've got the rate of fire. Springers are really powerful, but it's you gotta prime them, and then HPA's got its own pros and cons too.
And if you look at the advantage about that is it's really low mechanical complexity. There's virtually nothing in it. It probably has less than a dozen moving parts total.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a mag release, and that's pretty much it. The only thing that goes wrong is the supercore needing servicing. Okay, so in terms of reliability, you've only got a few little bits to really worry about there.
If you think about Springer servicing, I mean, mine gets completely field stripped, cleaned, rebuilt, relubricated, and put back together every game. And then at lunchtime, there's always a barrel clean and then a quick breech clean. If you're running a Springer, you're not really looking at much more difficulty. And I think the important thing to get across to people about the HPA stuff is that if you're smart and you use the commercially available regulators and bottles that are certified, and that you don't try and do it on the cheap with mismatched and poor equipment, keep the bottle, the link line and the regulator all bought and properly spec'd, it is really safe, because you can't, the umbilical is out of both ends. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you've not got like a 2-litre Coke bottle in your back, and you've got the proper equipment, like I said, it's only a maximum of 100 psi coming out of your hose, and I think there really isn't the issue behind it. But there seems to be, like you said, quite a bit of stigma behind it and kind of worries, which I think as blasters are becoming more popular and more people are seeing them, people are getting them in their hands, I think that will definitely fade. But I'm just really looking forward to that actually happening, because I think it'll be really cool to see what happens.
Yeah. I'll bring Derek back in at that point in a minute, Pete, if I can. Have you got anything before we bring Derek back in that you want to sum up?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing. So, in terms of it being overpowered in the UK, obviously we're limited to things being semi-auto. So you'll always have kind of... Oh, just lost a super call then. You will always have an issue that way. So it's never going to be too dominant. But a little project I am working on at the moment is like a shotgun style blaster, so double barrel. So it'll be powered by a Specs BZ, so cheaper alternative, but still semi-auto in that it will be powered with a RSCB. So you'll drop the darts in the back, and then just tip it down forwards, and then fire every shot. And I know this is all I've got at the moment, but it's a good proof of concept. It has worked. So I fired a good 3 or 4 shots, no problem, just out of this little test setup. So that is something else I'll be working on. But it'll be a nice, cheap alternative to semi-auto HPA as well.
Nice. I can hear Rab screaming, "Take my money," with a Glaswegian twang from all the way in Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you're able to see my screen, but I can just show you quickly. Cloth, I don't know if you can see my screen.
I've got your stream up there now. Yeah,
lovely. So there you go. So those of you, not that I'm a big Call of Duty player, but this is the MK2 carbine, I believe, from Call of Duty. So this is what it will be based off of, and you can see that if I take the canvas away, it'll be a bottle-in stock blaster, and that's currently the piece that I'm working with. So that's what it looks like. But that's enough from me.
So good.
So Derek, obviously we're just into the last few minutes of the segment, and just before we go, obviously you heard from Pete about some of the challenges. How do you see legality and regulation impacting upon what we do?
You're probably speaking in terms of HPA, and from what I've experienced myself, at least where I live, is there hasn't been much problem as long as you're open and honest and you communicate with your local authorities about those laws. In UK is probably different, but here I've done HPA almost every event I've been to this past 2 years, and every time people say, "Oh, we're gonna be shut down. You gotta be careful. It's too loud," and we've never had any problems. We've had some police officer park patrol just stop by and look at it. And it's like, yeah, it's actually okay. There are laws and regulations here against airsoft and paintball, but those are mostly regulated for public safety and property damage. And with nerf, neither one of those are really that much of a concern unless, even at like 300 FPS, it's not that dangerous to be hit by, and it's not going to damage property like airsoft or paintball. And so I haven't seen any regulations where I live that would affect that. The main concern would come from the idea of, society's viewpoints on firearms or guns and this kind of thing in general, such as Etsy being a little bit more strict. However, if we just communicate and are open about what we're doing and the intent is they're toys to have fun, they're not dangerous, and I wouldn't expect us to have to suffer as hard of a ban as airsoft or paintball usually does. And then I guess in Australia they have been shut down with gel blasters or gel balls and things like that. And so different regions in the world are definitely affected differently. However, I feel like that the best way to resolve that would be communication and being responsible on our part as well as people in the hobby and as players to take the initiative to be responsible and to play safely. And I think
one thing I think people really need to get on board with is they must support game organisers' decisions, because game organisers are driving our hobby and are doing a lot for us. And if a game organiser says they can't accept what you're asking to bring to the game, I think if you want the game to continue, that accepting the game organisers' status quo so that they're comfortable and can keep running games. If the game doesn't fit your needs, one of the things that we've discovered is that you can start your own game and, support each other in starting. So the more games there are and the wider variety of games there are, the more it can only be good for growth.
Yeah, I would agree with
Derek, I
that.
can ask you that 12-month question. Where do you see us in 12 months before we go out?
Yeah, game organizers that know their stuff and prepare for the game definitely respect their authority, and especially as someone who, especially if you go, out of your own town, you travel to somebody else's event, definitely should always respect their authority. And even if like it's their home turf, for example, and they invited you, they're a host, it's almost like you're a guest to a party, and are you going to be polite and respectful, or are you going to trash their party? And you wouldn't do it in any other instance or in the sport or in any other setting, so you shouldn't do that at nerf either. So
absolutely. So remember that rule 0 DBAD still applies no matter how good your equipment is. I'm going to have to wrap it up there because we're now out of time. We're ready to go back into another ad break before the next session. So thank you very much, Derek and Pete, for a
Thanks for having us on.
fantastic contribution.
And now on Foam Fest Live 2, we return to Tom, Foam Data Services, with his hamster-powered internet, and he is joined by my 3D base and Orion blasters.
Welcome back. Hopefully I've put some more coal in the router and we'll be back up and running. I apologise if the speed's been up and down. It's probably my wretched children screaming things. How dare they watch their own TV shows and stuff on my internet. I want to welcome Orion Blasters and my 3D base. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's okay. So Dan, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Perfect. I'm Dan. I'm from California in the United States. I am an employee and owner. I'm the only person that's part of Orion Blasters. And you probably know me from the Lynx Springer.
And my 3D base, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is my son, Lucas, and I'm Chris from my 3D base. And we're dialed in from Munich in Germany. And yeah, we're the guys behind the NG series. Yeah.
Is that collaborative father and son effort? You both work on different aspects.
We were just talking about this in the break before that Dan does a lot of, or just does springers, and we do flywheelers almost exclusively.
If I go into the questions that we did for the other guys, I will start, if you're all right with that, I'll go to Dan first. So what first kind of made you aware of Community Blasters and made you think, I'm going to design a really great bullpup blaster?
So my story is that I was not really aware of the NIC, and I was messing around with my own designs, not making a whole lot of progress. And then Slug came out with the Caliburn, and I think I was one of the first to get the hardware kit. And I printed one, and I put it together and thought, this is really, really great, and I want to change some things. And so I worked on the first rival conversion for the Caliburn, and that didn't work for reasons I won't get into right now. But the point is that previously I wasn't making a whole lot of progress because I was trying to design an entire blaster from scratch. And with the Caliburn, I was able to have a blaster that already worked, and I had the full CAD, the step files and everything, and I could just modify one part at a time to slowly modify it to something that I wanted it to be. And then from that, I had the experience and the confidence to then design a blaster from the ground up. That was the Taurus, and that had its problems, so then we went on to the Lynx. So for me, the Caliburn was like the first big community blaster because it was open source, because it worked so well, and also because Slug was so approachable. And after a while, I had questions, and I was able to talk to him, and he was able to kind of teach me. And and get me to the place where I was able to design blasters on my own. So,
if we're ever fortunate enough to be able to give out like a Nerf Lifetime Achievement Award, Slug's got to be near the top of the list. I mean, if you look at kind of the greats, he's right up there, isn't he? And I think we have seen a real common theme with this, is the Caliburn has been a huge inspiration and help to everybody. So, my 3D base, the same question to you. What got you inspired to start creating your own community blaster?
For us, it actually started the other way around. So we had a print farm, 4 or 5 years ago. So we started with 3D printing. And then I think I saw the FDL on YouTube. And being an engineer, I thought, geez, I can do this much better. And turned out I couldn't. But this got me started. So this is how I started with the NG1. I'm just putting in a picture here. So I started with a full-scale primary thing, but what I wanted to do is wanted to make it somewhat simpler. The FDL has brushless and ESCs, so I wanted to do it brushed and basically cheaper and much more affordable, which also means that maybe it doesn't reach the same type of performance. But anyway, so this is how it started. Funnily enough, I started with a big blaster. The logical thing would have been to start with a side arc first, the small one. This is what started. So basically for us, it was the FDL.
And I know Jesse was very active in the maker community and actually in promoting the kind of maker side of the hobby. And that was partly what drew him into kind of making the FDL, was he was a maker and engineer first. And it's interesting to see that you came through the maker side of things again. And it's one of those things where you look at a Nerf blaster and you think it's a relatively simple construct, and yet it can be a surprisingly complicated. I came from car building and I thought, I know a lot about mechanical things. How hard can it be? And it's certainly an eye-opener.
Right. I mean, from an engineering point of view, you can make it arbitrarily complex, right? But if you want to start producing and selling them, you have to take that into consideration. And this is also true for the manufacturing process. So in this case, being additive manufacturing, you have to take all of this into consideration. If I do a blaster that is overly complex, it just takes so much time to produce, and I have to stock all the different parts and things. And what I'm trying to do here at my 3D base is to reduce complexity to a minimum, while still achieving decent performance in terms of FPS and accuracy. While keeping it fairly simple. This is the NG2 Pathfinder, so it's a full auto version of the NG2 Goblin.
That's your latest development of your designs.
No, it's not. This is the NG2. We're down to the. We have been working on the NG5 lately, which is a much more. Let me just show that one. The NG5, which was terrible to design. It took me like a year. This thing is very compact. In a lot of flywheel blasters, you have the flywheels being so big, so they stick out a bit, and some people don't like the design aesthetics. So I told myself, okay, geez, let's try to make the flywheels as small as possible to get a very compact design. And this is what you have in the NG5. And the NG5 is also mag in handle. It has an angled mag, and this was a tough nut to crack in the design. So I was ready to give up, but my wife told me, no, you've come so far. Finish it. So I did. So this is the latest idea.
Lucky in the development of the aftermarket parts, like those angled mags, has cut a lot of corners where you don't have to make the whole infrastructure. Dan, like you were saying, where you don't have to design everything. There are some things and Flywheel the World and the work of Flywheels, a lot of people have started to make different parts which you can incorporate. So that takes us on to our kind of second question, which is, where would you, if you were going to design your kind of personal favorite blaster design, and you've been inspired by what you've inspired, where would you like to take your design next? What sort of thing? What makes a really great community blaster? I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Sorry, is that a question for Dan or?
Sorry.
Dan first.
Okay, perfect. What makes a really great community blaster? Or, I mean, it's two questions in one. Well, what makes the blaster that I would really like to use? You know, I feel like the Lynx was just so practical and utilitarian, and it was a very good primary. It was the primary that I wanted to use. And now I'm not so interested in repeating that. I'm more interested in some of the gimmicks and some of the quirks that make this hobby really unique and fun. So I've been thinking a lot recently about something that has more of a rifle form factor, something with maybe shells, something that you can easily single load, but also use, you know, just if it's quirky, I really enjoy it. So I've been kind of pushing away from truly utilitarian. But what makes a great community blaster? I mean, I think it helps if it's open source. I think it helps if the creator is transparent and there's a good community built around it. I think it helps if people are making mods for it. And I also think that it helps that, you know, you see it on the field and you go up to that person, you can talk to them, and that they've had a positive experience with the blaster and with the creator and the company and whoever is selling it. So I think that it helps to make a good community blaster. It is a little nebulous because there are blasters that are lesser known, and yet I still think are wonderful community blasters. But all things said, I mean, most blasters in our community, I think, are absolutely wonderful examples of great community blasters. So kind of a vague answer to the question, but
for you, it's that mixture of creativity, uniqueness, quirky features, as well as that's what makes a great, as well as the kind of support and the community development.
Absolutely, absolutely.
My 3D base, what do you think, you know, makes a really great community blaster?
Oh geez, it's a tricky question. I think you know, the thing is, every blaster, everything you post and everything you put out there inspires somebody else, right? Even if it's just the tiniest thing, it helps you to improve on your designs and iterate. And that's, to me, that's the beauty. As I explained, for us, it started with the FDL. Now the length in terms of performance and compactness is like, for me, engineering-wise, a great leap forward. And so that it's hard to boil down to one design. I think they all have something that moves the technology forward.
For you, the great community blasters are the things that inspire other people to create and to move forward, as well as being great objects themselves.
Right. You know, I always, or sometimes I ask myself the question in terms of technology: what can I share? Is there a limit? And I'm not sure. For example, one example is we do our own flywheels. So we print our flywheels, which makes the design very, very flexible. And we do this in a special way. And then one day I thought, okay, geez, maybe put a picture out there and show people how you can 3D print flywheels. It's just one example of a little bit of technology that maybe helps somebody else to improve his design, or he comes up with a new idea, you know?
So that sharing is also a really key part of it, where being able to share and collaborate with other people and being open with your creative process. Both you and Dan have said that openness from the creator really helps actually make it a great blaster, in that other people can take inspiration and can take technical aspects of that and push their own designs.
Correct.
And I think, you know, FDL did do a lot of that kind of showing what was possible, and that kind of inspirational stuff. You know, they did reach a whole sector of the market that really hadn't been met by a lot of nerf producers, in that they were maker focused initially. And although they were a premium design with a premium price tag, you know, they took things that had been kind of rumbling around in the community for a while, like computer control and other things, and kind of they brought the whole package together, rightly or wrongly, whether you like or dislike the design and the company and the ethos and the costs and things. I think the influence is there. You know, on the flywheel side, they're probably as influential as Captain Slug has been on the Springer side of things, and certainly in bringing makers in. So if we were then to say, you know, you've got the elements in your blasters and you've got the things. So if you were going to take your design and what would be the kind of greatest thing you could produce based on where you're at now, if you didn't have limits into your technology, where would you like to be? What would be like your ultimate blaster?
You know, that's a tough question for an engineer, because as soon as I have a design finished, I think it's not optimal. The things you need to improve. what I'm dreaming about at the moment is to go for a next primary. You know, I've been working on the NG1 as a primary, and then I've been doing secondaries for a while now. And so I would like to take a lot of that stuff and a lot of knowledge I've acquired to do a next a primary, a flywheel primary. You know, maintaining that philosophy of keeping it simple. Not necessarily kicking out functions, but achieving those functions with simplicity. It sounds weird, but like, I don't want to use ESCs. I don't want to use Arduinos. And maybe, you know, you can use a mechanical setup to achieve, let's say, a switch between semi-auto and full auto and these kind of things. So simplicity.
The Rapid Strike kind of almost does that. I had a very early Arduino controlled Rapid Strike where you could just switch between semi and full, and it just used the standard pusher. And I had a design for a control board that I'd drawn up with an engineer friend of mine that used PIC controllers. You know, the PIC chips that are like, you know, they're under $2 each, and he to pick back in the day, and he was like, "Why are you using a Atmega, you know, a base chip to control this stuff? You could just do it with this PIC controller that costs pence." And he still had his old PIC programmer, and he just wrote all the code for it. And that would have been about, I don't know, $3 a board probably, and minimal connections, and you know, no programming required because it was all locked off. And he had it set up so it could have taken multiple inputs. That kind of stuff is fun to dream about, but it's making it a reality is always difficult.
Right. I mean, one of the challenges we're facing, and maybe Don has a similar challenge here, is that it's kind of hard to stock things because you have to invest, right? If you buy things you have to stock, like motors and these kinds, you have to invest, and maybe people are not interested in those kind of things in let's say half a year, and you're stuck with those things. So for a small maker, that's a risk you need to consider. Like we stocked motors, new motors, we had those developed, and that's always a risk you have to be willing.
And Derek, in the last interview, was talking about taking on some of that risk as a production engineer, effectively, so that he would look at the production side of things, and that the creator would create, and then he would take some of the risk in exchange for taking some of the profit out of that in the future. Which, if creating is your thing, I mean, so Dan, where would you like kind of push your design?
Well, I want to share an anecdote first. I collaborate a lot with Silver Fox to do group buys to bring the cost per unit down for Lynx hardware. And we did a group buy where we collectively bought 10,000 screws. So we each got 5,000, and each Lynx uses 4. So I'm looking at this thinking, am I going to make a little over 1,000 Lynxes? At that point, it sold like 100. So, so then the challenge becomes you're working on new designs, and all of a sudden you have to find a way to use those screws, those very specific screws, in places maybe they don't quite naturally want to be, but you make it work just so you can get through them. So there are pluses and minuses to having a lot of inventory on hand. As far as like the blaster, it's a tricky question because I like working on projects in secret, but I suppose this is the event to kind of let some of those secrets slide a little bit. I have been for a long time incredibly interested in a hybrid type blaster that is both a flywheel and a springer and uses a common magazine. So the magazine physically moves up and down to allow the dart to feed either into the springer side or the flywheel side. And so it would have combined controls. That's all I'm really going to say about it. But that comes out of competitive events where you really like, I'm the springer guy on a competitive team, and I don't really want to be flywheel, but sometimes I just need a little bit of burst fire, and I don't want to have 2 separate magazines because I don't want to lock my ammo in one magazine or the other. So just combine magazines with a dart that works in both flywheel and springer systems, and just compact. And that's all I'll say about that. But that's been a project I've been thinking about and working on for a while.
And that's been driven by your experiences as a player.
Exactly. And I will say that the Lynx comes directly
sport competitive games. And am I right in thinking that you were involved in the 5v5 competitive tournament?
Yes, I was on Team Null, and in the last Ragnar Oktoberfest, which I want to say was last year, but I think was 2 years ago at this point. Null did place second, which go us. That was pretty incredible. And at that game, I used the first prototype links ever to exist. And it worked pretty well. At some points, I switched over to my Talon Claw because still the links was still in prototyping. But yeah.
And that's really exciting if you're using your own equipment in a game and you made it entirely from scratch. Even if you bought a kit and you've assembled it yourself, there's not very many hobbies for under $500 where you can completely assemble and run your own stuff. You know, I mean, a lot of other things have got much more expensive, or things are much more finished. You know, RC and lots of other stuff. It's pretty common to buy ready to run now for a lot of that stuff. My 3D base. You know, what inspired you? What inspires you to kind of keep creating? Where do you draw your inspiration from?
All over the place. It's people doing their own things, and posting pictures on Instagram, doing YouTube videos. It's like it is an interaction. You don't get inspired from nothing, right? Now, if Don, for example, one very interesting thing, if Don mentioned he wanted to combine a Springer with a flywheeler, and then I was thinking, geez, we need to talk. Something I would never have considered, but this is how you start pitching ideas, right? It's like a brainstorming. You sort of give each other ideas. So I want to keep open-minded. You know, I want to like draw inspiration from others, and right.
The openness for you, the openness of the community and the interaction between the different people in the community and the different creators, and even just people who have random ideas feeding into that community, is what drives your creativity. Now, what was your son holding up there? If you want to just explain that to us.
He was holding up the NG5. That was the little beast that was keeping me busy for so long.
Just showing everybody a good clear view of it.
The trickiest part in this one was that it uses a standard Talon, right? So not the angled one. And it uses custom flywheels and a new type of motor we have. And if you feed in your dot at an angle into your flywheels, it's really tricky to get it to fly in a straight line afterwards. So that was really keeping me busy with this one.
Because one of the things I'm famous for was introducing the idea that you build to a set of tolerances, and that when you set up your mechanical systems, that you do them within a set of tolerances. So, you know, that you had your flywheel mass and your flywheel sizes all within a set of tolerances, and then you had your flywheel centering within a set of tolerances, and that in a nerf system, stacked errors were contributing to the wildly inaccurate way that things were. And if you wanted consistency, you had to shoot for precision in your building and in your designing. And there's a very good illustration of that, in that, you know, you were working within the limits of what you have available. You have to adapt the equipment and the tolerances to cope with what you've got.
Yeah, I mean, I was unaware. The biggest challenge was accuracy here, and I was unaware of the problem. And the first prototypes would shoot completely wild, and it took me forever to figure out. And then I had there's a little lever that pushes down the dot straight, so that it's straight before it moves into
yes.
But this was driving me crazy.
A lot of people did the same thing with those dart guides when they were a big deal, and like pre-brassing before the flywheel. And my argument always was that if you set the precision up in the feed mechanism, you wouldn't have to have a guide tube. If you got it straight from the beginning, that you would be there and it would feed in equally. And if you didn't have your flywheels off center by like 0.5 millimeter, which is over a distance of a shot of even 30 feet, is a huge variation.
And you know what? Coming back to your question, where the inspiration comes from, this lever idea came from Lucas and not from me. I was incapable of finding a technical solution. So I went to him and asked him, what do you think? What can we do? And then he had this funny question. And then I was thinking, oh, geez, yeah, a lever. And this is how we solved it. So it comes from the weirdest places sometimes.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about Nerf, is that it does involve a lot of different people within the creative process. You know, it's not a very close field. Anybody can have an idea. The way kids come up with inventing things in games, that mess you up your plans is a huge, I've been ambushed by kids who thought of the most inventive ways of concealing themselves. I had one young man who pretended to be a coat on a coat rack, and he stood behind his coat, and I cheerfully came past him, and then he just kind of leant out and shot me with his job, and I would never have thought like I could be a coat. But, and that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're so, I'm so stuck in my mindset, I can't find a solution, right? And I need to, ask a little guy for help.
And children and young people are not in those fixed mindsets. And it's great that our games are open to them because of the way that they think and the way that they interact. They will come up with solutions that maybe, as you grow older, your thinking becomes more focused. You become less lateral thinking as you grow older. It's just what happens.
Yeah.
Young with a very narrow mindset. I'm really grateful for young people for keeping me out of trouble and keeping me, on the straight and narrow. And every time I run into a block, I'm lucky that my son and I have worked together for a long time, and he's very good at giving me a metaphorical slap around the face, sometimes a physical slap around the face, to remind me to think differently. And we're really lucky that nerf is a hobby that does allow that work with adults and children and young people all together in one big melting pot, because you can approach it on so many different levels.
Yeah.
If we were to look into our crystal ball, I'll go to Dan first on this one, and we were to use our soothsaying powers, where would you think nerf could go within the next 12 months? What things might we see?
It's tricky. I was talking to someone higher up in the airsoft industry, and they were telling me a little bit of history, and they were giving me a prediction, which I will share with you now. The story was that airsoft was illegal in China for a long time, so the feedback cycle of players to factories to revise the products was incredibly long. And in other countries where airsoft was legal and airsoft was also manufactured, the feedback loop was much tighter. So you had innovation at a much greater scale going much faster. So when gel ball was legal for a short amount of time in China, you had incredible innovation in a very short amount of time. And then gel ball was axed. It's not legal anymore. But with nerf, the story is now legal in China. There's a lot of innovation in that space. And whether or not China gets nerf banned, whether it becomes illegal in China, Europeans and North Americans and Australians and Singapore, everywhere that nerf is played, we will probably get our first taste of a proper full metal AEG, airsoft style AEG in our space. And once we have a taste of that, whether or not China can no longer produce that, or whether it's legal or not in China, it will change our hobby. I don't know, just like HPA, if we're going to be not allowing it at all games or just special games, but that is my prediction. Full metal AEGs.
Right. And my 3D base, what do you predict?
Well, I think what I've seen lately is that there are more and more blasters, right? And not only prototypes, but people are developing to the point where they can produce them. And I remember when I started with the NG1, there were some designs around, but not so many. And I would say that this will take off more and more. People are producing things with their 3D printers at home. So I would imagine that there will be more and more awesome developments from people all over the globe, basically popping up and new ideas.
A greater proliferation and continued proliferation, and the growth of makers and 3D printing across the globe may well result in some new places getting into nerf and new things happening, and as well as continued growth, which I think is really positive. And I think obviously everyone's had everyone in the Western world's had kind of a big pause this year, haven't they? Really, to take stock and create, and we've had to kind of calm down gaming a little bit more. And if you were, what would you think are the remaining challenges to developing, more community blasters and generally pushing things forward, Dan? Obviously, China's regulation may potentially be a problem with your idea, but anything else?
I mean, I think a challenge is that, hobby grade blasters are available on store shelves in some parts of the country, and so we have an influx of players who don't necessarily know our traditions, don't know our mindset, and we want to gently educate them about the NIC, where we come from, what our values are, but we don't want to alienate them. And it can be incredibly frustrating to be gentle in that education. And it's something that our hobby will continue to learn if we want to hold on to our old values while also, moving forward into the future with all these new offerings.
Important message there for people who have been in the hobby a while and who feel that they are the kind of gatekeepers, if you like, of the spirit of nerf. That it's important to remember that zero still applies, and that actually just because there's a bunch of new people with maybe new ideas doesn't mean that your ideas are better than theirs and their ideas are better than yours. It's your job to induct people into the way we do things, but do it in a kind of respectful way, so that they don't just feel that they're being immediately shut out, but that then we do remember that our values are important and they're what makes nerf, and that we mustn't necessarily change our values, but we must indoctrinate people into our values in a way that is not confrontational. My 3D base, any challenges before we go?
No. Can you repeat the question? I can't.
Yes, of course. And what sort of challenges do you think there may be towards nerf developing in times ahead?
Oh, okay, right. Well, specifically, I can mention one thing that is applicable to Germany. That's legislation, because you're basically confined to 100 FPS for short darts, and then you have a kinetic energy limitation. Above that, I would have to send it in to the authorities to test and certify. So that's something I will have to go through, but that's a German thing. I suppose in the UK you have something similar. But if you want to boost performance or go a bit higher in terms of performance, legislation will be a challenge over here.
I think that's something that everybody is potentially going to have to deal with, isn't it? Is that as we grow bigger, we become more of and that's one of the problems Airsoft has faced, is that it grew bigger and it became a target for lawmakers who they love nothing better than to squash people's enjoyment of things under the guise of making people safe. It only takes a few bad actors, doesn't it, to draw attention to things. And that's where maybe Dan's idea of inducting new players sensitively into the way the hobby works is important, because if those new players turn out to be less concerned with safety and with being responsible, that's something that we all have to deal with. So it's up to all of us to take responsibility for inducting those new players kindly and respectfully, but keeping to our. Thank you very much, and it was really informative, and I think everybody's learned an awful lot about what you do, and thank you very much for dropping by. I think we're due to go to break.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.